Recording in progress.
Okay, good evening. Welcome back to the regular meeting of the BET. It is now 7:22. We exited out of executive session at 7:18 p.m. There will be no voting, so there's no motions for any votes. I'm now going to entertain the Pledge of Allegiance. So if we can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I keep saying that next time I'm going to appoint a Republican and a Democrat to do the Pledge of Allegiance so we don't get all this feedback. Okay. So first on the agenda is the request for budget adjustment, routine applications. Mr. Drake, the floor is yours.
I'll read them in sequence. The first one is CC1 from the Conservation Department for $25,015, which is an appropriation for the mural. The second one is HD1 from the Health Department, $173,396, approval to use a grant. And the third one is HD2 from the Health Department, $43,311, approval to use a different grant.
And Laura Erickson, you have a motion.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to make a motion to take up the CC1 item as a non-routine item.
Okay, do I have a second?
Seconded.
Seconded by Jeff Raymer. Are there any objections? Okay, hearing none, that's a 12-0 vote, so we will take that up as a non-routine item. So on the remaining, we have, state them again, I'm sorry.
That's okay, we have two now. HD1 from the Health Department, $173,396, which is approval to use a grant. And the second one is HD2 from the Health Department, $43,311, which is approval to use a different grant.
Okay, any objections? Hearing none, I'll assume that's a 12-0 vote. So those items have passed. Okay, next on the agenda is the non-routine items.
Would you like me to move it, or who should move it, Ms.?
I think you should move them. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll move them in sequence. The first one is SE7 from the First Selectman, $942.50, which is the release of conditions for the small invoice of the accountants, which is in your packet.
Okay, do we have a report?
Yeah.
Yes. Make sure.
Go ahead, Leslie Tarkington.
Yeah, I know. I was thought we might do Conservation Commission first since we're doing that. Okay, so as BET liaison to the Nathaniel Witherall and the First Selectman's RFP Evaluation Committee, Mr. Dukes commented that $25,000 have been set aside for consulting expertise to assist the committee to understand various aspects of the sale lease proposals resulting from the RFP. Mr. Dukes commented that the $942,050 fee for consulting by PKF O'Connor Davies afforded the RFP Evaluation Committee a clearer analysis of Witherall operations for reporting their future findings to the First Selectman, to the Witherall Board, and then the BET, and then the RTM. Mr. Deuce made a motion to release the conditions on $942.50 for professional services, and the committee voted 2-2. The opposed were Ms. Moriarty and Mr. Raymer. So that motion failed, and as such, the release of conditions was not forwarded to the full BET.
Okay, discussion, Mr. Deuce.
Just to add to what Ms. Tarkington mentioned, the condition restricts these additional funds for consulting needs for this committee, and the additional accounting work that was done, helpful not only for the committee, but also helpful for Nathaniel Witherall. Larry Simon, the chairman of the board there, was very appreciative. This would be the second distribution from this appropriation of $25,000. Earlier this year, we approved a $8,000 distribution to fund a physical needs capital assessment study for the facility.
Mr. Raymer?
I'm repeating an objection that I had raised at the time that in June of this year, when the original $8,000 was released. My objection at that time, my objection to this too, is that we allowed these funds, extended them to the first selectman for a select purpose, and that purpose was not to produce promotional material to assist in a sale of the facility or lease of the facility or whatever it is that's being discussed by the first selectman's committee. It was to provide the first selectman and his team with consulting capability for them to better understand what they have with Nathaniel Witherall. And I think these funds are being used for a different purpose, and that is that they've reached a decision apparently, or at least are weighing a decision, something which has not yet been brought back to the full BET, and that appears to be either a sale or a lease or a management contract or something of that sort. The materials that are prepared are useful materials for a purchaser or lessee to have and consider, but it's not additional information for the first selectman or his committee. It is a worthy point to me that that Mr. Deuce raises, that this was useful also to Nathaniel Witherall and to Larry Simon. I think that's not an unimportant point, and I did pause and consider that. Feel that what's happened here is that these funds have been deflected to a purpose which was not the purpose for which they were appropriated, and there was an explicit condition which is not being honored.
Thank you. Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, I just should add, or you should add, Madam Chairman, that we have just this evening received a request from the Office of the First Selectman specifically, that the amount $942.50 is needed and is to be restricted for additional consulting needs for the Nathaniel Witherall review. I think we should make that statement for the record.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none, I'll take a record of vote. If you can call the roll, Bill?
Yes, this is SC7. Ms. Cruiser,
Yes.
Ms. Hess,
Yes.
Ms. Crumick,
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington,
Yes.
Mr. Fisher.
Harry, you're muted.
I'll come back to you. I'm a yes. Ms. Fasciotis,
Yes.
Mr. Raymer,
No.
Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod,
David, you're muted.
Ms. Erickson,
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod,
Yes.
Mr. Fisher.
Yes.
That was 11-1. The item passes.
Thank you.
But just by the way, you want me to back up, or do you want us all to back up to CC1, or?
Yes.
No, I'm going to take that at the after the tag,
Okay,
since it was added to the non-routine.
okay, then I'll just read the next TA2 from TAG, which is $75,000, the release of conditions for the third quarter allocation.
Thank you. Ms. Tarkington, your report?
Yes, Mr. Miller requested the committee to consider the release of conditions on the town's third quarter contribution to TAG. So this is an accelerated request. He pointed out that TAG continued to operate at a lower level of operations. Its annual fundraising has been rescheduled from fall to spring, and the reimbursement from the American Recovery Plan funds had not yet been received, all of which made its cash flow situation challenging. The committee acknowledged TAG's extraordinary response to town emergency and discussed the possibility of releasing the remaining annual contribution of $151,000 or only the $75,000 requested. The motion was made to recommend the release of conditions on $75,000 and to forward that application to the full BET as a non-routine application. And again, That is because the Budget Committee does not have authority to approve as such conditions, only to recommend the release. The committee voted 4-0-0 and that motion carried.
Thank you. Open for discussion? Okay, hearing none, Leslie Moriarty.
I just wanted to add, I thought Ms. Tarkington gave a very good report. TAG remains an important service for the town, provides a lot of benefits to our seniors and disabled citizens. It also comes in case of emergency, has been helpful to neighbor. It was helpful with the flooding situation a few weeks ago and assisted the police department. However, we do expect during the budget committee hearings in February again to discuss TAG's forecast going forward and the role it plays in the town as it continues to operate very close to zero cash basis.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we all appreciate the work that TAG has done, especially during COVID, at which time they played a very important role in assuring that meals got to where they needed to go. Okay, so any further discussion? Do I hear any objections to the release of the condition? Hearing none.
I think this should be a roll call vote.
Okay, no problem then. Bill?
Ms. Erickson,
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Ms. Fosley-Otis.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Mr. Fisher,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington,
Yes,
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes,
Ms. Crumick,
Yes.
Ms. Hess,
Yes.
Ms. Cruiser.
Yes.
That was unanimous.
Okay. Next up is the mural.
Yes, I'll go back and read CC1, Conservation Department, $25,015, which is an additional appropriation for the mural.
Thank you. Ms. Tarkington, your report, and then Laura, I'll entertain your thoughts. Ms. Tarkington?
yes. Yes, Ms. Sesto, the department head for conservation, explained that the RTM had approved a donation of $25,015. Really, I think this is a gift received from the Greenwich Botanical Center for the completion of the pollinator pathway mural on the wall adjacent to the bus shelter opposite the high school campus on Route 1. Ms. Sesto noted that the law department has not completed their review of the contract. Ms. Moriarty made a motion and again to approve the application of $25,015 to complete the pollinator pathway mural with the expectation that its contract documents and related indemnification will be approved by the law department and to recommend the application to the full BET as a routine application. And that the committee voted 4-0-0 and that motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Erickson?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to my colleagues for agreeing to discuss this as a non-routine item. I'll be very brief. I have one request and two requests. One is perhaps directed to the law committee to take a look at this instance in view of budget resolutions. As we know, our rules call for us to make an appropriation for cash gifts that are accepted by the RTM over $5,000. I find it would be inconceivable for us to deny such an appropriation once the RTM accepts a cash gift. So perhaps this instance and any future other instances, they don't happen very often, but perhaps they could be dealt with in a budget resolution to save a step, save some time. And secondly, because the item in our packet, the memo dated July 8th, talked about this item being a grant, that memo is out of date. And I think it's just important that we clarify for the record what happened. And perhaps Pete could give us a few sentence description. My understanding is that it was considered by the RTM as a cash gift, not a grant. So just for the record, I just wanted some clarity in the minutes. Thank you.
Keith?
Just trying to unmute.
That's
Yes,
okay.
I did send an email to the BET members that were not part of this. This started in May. It originally started when the Conservation Commission thought that they were accepting a gift, not a grant, a donation, and the money was not going to be needed to be appropriated. There was a couple of miscommunications whether budget resolution number 18 applied, which applies to grants as opposed to donations and gifts. There was a opinion or opinions issued by the law department. So I think it's really a matter of one or two misinterpretations of the budget resolutions. And in this case, we probably put it in reverse, where it should have been accepted as a gift or donation, and an appropriation set up as far as step one. And then it should have gone to the RTM as far as accepting and appropriating the gift as far as the $25,000. I think one of the misconceptions all along was that a number of people thought that the town was not going to accept any money and no expenditures were going to be made by the town. It was going to be held. Everything was going to be done independent of the town. So to Laura's point, and this is an outlier in my experiences, I haven't seen any situation that arose like this where it was a combination of some of it was a gift and some of it was money that needed to be appropriated. So for the record, I think what we need to do, and when we go through the budget process next year, is we probably need a generic, probably, if that's acceptable, type of resolution to handle a situation that arises like this. And that's my comments.
Thank you, Pete. Leslie Tarkington?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that this memo that's in this package was not delivered to the Budget Committee, and we did not have it to review when we were approving this item. And also, you know, I will also just comment that in the information that I had from the Law Department back in early July, that this was really originally formulated or whatever from the Sustainability Committee and not the Conservation Commission. So I think there were some other items of confusion here that are just a little different than our process. So I just want to make that comment that we did, in the Budget Committee, we did not see this memo that was delivered in tonight's package.
Thank you, but you've seen it now, so thank you. Bill Drake?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Laura, for rendering this more precise. So let's be sure that the minutes say what we want them to say. It's a gift with an appropriation, right? That's what we wish it to say, right?
Yes, that it is a gift. It was accepted by the RTM, and we are now also accepting the gift and appropriating the funds with the notations that were made by the
Budget Committee.
Budget Committee, which is a condition, but it's not a condition. So it's basically a suggestion, I guess, to the Law Department that that everything be in order before the monies are expended. Okay, roll call vote, please.
Yes. Ms. Cruiser,
Yes.
Ms. Hess,
Abstain.
Ms. Crumick,
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington,
Yes,
Mr. Fisher.
Abstain.
I'm a yes. Ms. Vasiliotis,
Come back to me, please.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod,
Yes.
Ms. Erickson.
Yes,
For the moment, that's 9 yeses, 2 abstains pending the chair's vote.
I'm going to abstain as well at this point.
So that becomes 903. It passes.
Thank you.
Ms. Chair, is it appropriate to ask the rationale for the 3 abstentions?
I'm happy to share. My view is that I think that there was some controversy and not everyone was happy over the mural and whether or not it fit in with the spirit of Greenwich. And so because of that, and for just sort of the respect for that view, I decided to abstain.
Thank you.
It's Harry, and I'd second Deborah's sentiment on that.
And my abstention is only just because the process was so convoluted, and I just think that we need to look better at process going forward with these types of gifts. Thank you.
Thank you for answering.
Okay, so that brings us to the assessor's report, and I will bring over.
Karen.
I'm sorry.
David's hands up.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
David.
I just wanted to offer a comment, and that is that to remind this board that we are a finance board. We're not a board to determine the values on social and other issues. We're a finance board. We should stay within the boundary of that. That's the only thing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, okay, Lauren, the assessor's report, you're up.
Okay, good evening. Members of the BET, I'd like to present the assessor's report for October 2021. First of all, the personal property declarations were mailed out back in September. They are due back November 1st into our office. All building permits and new constructions have been reviewed and are currently being added to the new 2021 valuations. As far as the 2021 revaluation is concerned, we still plan on sending out the notices by November 12th. We'll be sending notices out to every taxpayer in town. We have an informal hearing schedule that will allow 2 weeks in November, 2 weeks in December, and 2 weeks in January for any taxpayers, homeowners to come in and talk to the revaluation companies. That includes a couple evenings each week as well as 4 Saturdays. So there should be ample time and ample hearings available for anybody who would like to have a hearing and have any questions answered about their new assessments. In addition to that, my office will have on hand reports and listings of all sales and of all new assessments. And we are setting up an email address for taxpayers so they don't have necessarily, if they don't want to come in, they can email us. And that email address will be set up and we'll send that out with the notification in the increased notice as well. Okay, does anybody have any questions for me this evening?
Get off easy.
Yeah. You haven't gotten your assessments yet.
No questions?
So I move that we accept the assessor's report then.
Seconded.
Okay, moved by Leslie Tarkington, seconded by Jeff Raymer. Any objections? Hearing none, 12-0-0. Thank you, Lauren. You get
Thank
off
you.
easy this month.
Yep.
Keep up the good work. We appreciate it. Pete, you're up.
Good evening, Madam Chair and BET members. I'll be brief and let you ask questions. We're in the middle of the annual audit. I'd have to say that it's easier and I feel more comfortable working with the auditors when they're on site as opposed to remote. It's a convoluted, complicated, very labor-intensive process with a large number of testing that's done on a number of transactions. And the auditors who started a couple of weeks ago spend at least 2 days a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And this is a general comment, as working remotely versus not working remotely. I prefer to deal with people face to face, especially when you're working on this scale. And no offense to the meeting tonight, as far as we're at the being in a remote situation, but it's a lot easier working with outside auditors, and the amount of work we do working face to face. Other than that, the ARP committee is proceeding. We have another meeting this Friday. I put on page 1 of the controller's report. Dr. Nelson came forward with a very detailed presentation. And the reason I put that in there, it's I feel it's the first real attempt to ask for a specific amount of money for specific reasons. As you know, we're looking at over $40 million between the town ARP in 2 tranches and the Board of Education and the various ESSER 1, 2 in Corona relief funds. So we're moving along. It's a very complicated process. When I say complicated, I'm referring to the fact that you've got a lot of interested competing parties looking for over $40 million, it's a task that's between the town administrator, the first selectman, and the budget committee who's on this committee. You really got your hands full as far as what decisions you're going to make. But I'll stop there and open it to any questions on the controller's report.
Any questions? Boy, this is an easy group tonight.
They all go into the RTM meetings.
There you go.
Karen,
Yes, David.
just one comment here. I think the work that's being done by the ARP committee is really exemplary, and the input in particular that Ben Branyan is providing is extremely good. So while it's a big challenge, we should always have these kinds of challenges. They're ones I welcome. So great work by Pete, great work by Ben. Thanks.
Yep, and I'm looking forward to the work of the committee as well. You know, it's no easy task. As Pete said, there are competing interests that obviously want a piece of the pie, as they say. So I think that the work ahead is going to be extremely challenging. And I thank, the budget committee. I also thank the other members. I know that Demetra from the Commissioner of Human Services is also on that committee, and all are spending a lot of time and effort trying to figure out how to spend a lot of money. Any other questions, comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
All those, go
Go
ahead. All those in favor, or is anyone opposed? Hearing none, let's call that unanimous.
Thank you. Can I also ask people to mute their, I got a request from the Peanut Gallery to mute themselves when you're not speaking because there is feedback. And if you hear a little squeaking in the background, that's my dog in the crate that is not a happy camper right now. So, okay, treasurer's report. Any questions? No questions? Motion?
I'll move it.
Okay.
I
I'll
second.
second that.
Okay. Motion by Bill, seconded by Leslie.
We usually have 11 and 1 abstention.
Is that how we're being? Is that how it's going to go this month?
I
Okay.
abstain.
Thank you. Okay, so it's 11-01.
Thank you.
Okay, I have no standing committee reports, no liaison reports, no special project team reports. The next is new business. Let me bring up Sean O'Keefe, who's been waiting patiently as he is babysitting his grandchildren. Here we go. Where are you, Sean? Okay. And let me just do this. Hold on one second. Just trying to get everything up. Okay, this position was presented. I'm going to give the HR committee report. Hold on one second. Just have to, my computer is a little slow. Okay, this position was presented to the Human Resources Committee, and Mr. O'Keefe requested the addition of an executive chief chef and in the BOE's Food Services Department. He explained that funding currently exists in the budget for the position and that it would provide an opportunity to expand food offerings and increase revenue. Ms. Johnson, who is also the Director of Human Resources for the BOE, remarked that during an internal audit, there were 2 unfilled previous operation positions that existed in the org chart, and that despite a headcount loss of 2, the salaries were up by 2%. Mr. Nanarello, who is currently the Director of Food Services for the Greenwich Public Schools, explained in the past that he was staffed with a director and 2 managers. He was the director. There were 2 managers that were purchasing processed foods, and going forward, the executive chief chef would be responsible for training, supervision, and recipe development with the objective of reducing food costs and labor to break even. So the feeling is that currently the Director of Food Services is doing the job of 2 or 3 people, if you will, and that he needed the extra staff to manage the food at Greenwich High School with the idea of creating better prepared and fresh foods versus the processed foods that we were all used to when we were in high school. Sean, if I missed anything, please feel free to chime in.
Now, you remember the chili?
Yeah.
No, it was a great summary. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, very, very briefly, the funding is in place. This is a request for an FTE that Dave neglected to budget for in this budget process that we're in. The goal here, and I've asked him to get to this point, is to bring the food services function to a point where we're no longer relying on a town contribution. This executive chef position will help to facilitate, much more scratch-made foods, K through 12, that will hopefully grow profitable revenue, and again, get us to a point where we no longer have to rely on a town contribution.
Questions? Jeff, unmute yourself, please.
It's slightly off point, but I just wanted to add something which ties into what Sean's presentation had alluded to. I serve for you as a liaison on the Food Services Committee. Deborah has served with me. Deborah's service wasn't quite as long as mine, so I don't know that she had a chance to experience some of the earlier history with it. But it's worth my mentioning that there was a lot of dissatisfaction being expressed through that committee with the highly processed food, the high salt content, the poor palatability, the failure of the consumers of it, particularly in the high school, to accept that food. And there was a lot of pressure initially to bring in an outside service. In our conversations with these outside services, it seemed that you could purchase those services at one level, at which level you'd be getting the same processed food and things that you're getting now, or at a higher cost level, you could be getting something which was whole muscle meats and fresh vegetables and fresh produce and the like. And then the thought process then drifted over to, why can't we be doing that here at this level? And that's implicit in what the school administration is proposing now. Now, this is a chef, as I understand it, who's being brought in, and the attempt will be there to try and use fresh materials, whole muscle meats, et cetera, not processed food, not highly chemical, not a lot of preservatives, et cetera, not a lot of salt. So it should be healthier fare. It should be more palatable fare. It might work better with the consuming kids, particularly at the high school. I don't know if all that's going to happen, but I think it's worth a try. And I think that's what's involved. And it ties in nicely with the subject matters that were being discussed at the Food Services Committee, what we call the School Lunch Committee. And I just thought I'd be adding that comment.
Thank you, Jeff. We also asked for a taste testing after the chef is hired. So anyway, any other further comments?
Just thank you for taking me away from babysitting.
I know the challenges. Okay, Bill, do you want to do a roll call vote on this, please? You are muted. You have to unmute yourself. And
Bill, you're
again, I
muted.
ask,
Yes, Ms. Cruiser,
Yes.
Ms. Hess,
Yes.
Ms. Grummick,
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington,
Yes.
Mr. Fisher.
Yes.
I'm a yes, Ms. Bastiodis,
yes.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce.
Madam Chair, was that a condition you added at the end?
No, there is no, oh, you want the food
No,
testing as a condition?
I vote yes.
Mr.
Thank you.
Weistrad,
Yes.
Mrs. Erickson.
I abstain.
That was 11-01. Item passes.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Okay, have fun with your grandkids.
Will do.
Okay, next up is the budget guidelines. Ms. Tarkington.
So the Budget Committee last Tuesday passed the budget guidelines unanimously by a 4-0-0 vote. So I express my thanks to Mr. Geiger and Mr. Minarski for their assistance in preparing these fiscal year 2023 budget guidelines, and to each of the Budget Committee members, Leslie Moriarty, Andy Deuce, and Jeff Raymer. The guidelines serve as a framework for the proposed 22-23 municipal budget. And we have tried to pull back some of the text to make them exactly that, a framework and guidelines for the budget. You know, a lot of effort and time that went into the construction of these. There was a lot of compromise by all involved. The proposed estimate used a lot of actual information in terms of contractual salaries and insurance numbers, et cetera, and the overall estimate tried to balance the needs of many constituencies. And I think everyone has been working together in terms of making sure the town is delivering the services that people want. I think also, you know, I'm grateful to my other Budget Committee members that we came together collaboratively to unanimously approve these fiscal year 23 budget guidelines. And I think that these guidelines support our schools and services, improve our buildings and infrastructure, and build up our town's financial reserve, and will continue to enhance our town's status as the premier community in Connecticut. So, Madam Chairman, I don't know if you want any details, or are we fine with this short presentation?
I don't know if you just want to give some highlights as to, if not, we can just go into a discussion and.
No, I'm happy to give highlights.
Just very short highlights, please.
So some quick highlights. I think we budgeted the salaries based on either contractual information or expected contractual information by the 12 different pay groups. Overall, the contractual salaries and the 100s increased by over 2.5%, 2.56%. We also increased the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800s by 2.25%, slightly higher than we had originally thought as the inflation rate. We looked at utility costs and we allocated benefits. This is something we did last year for the first time. And Roland spends a lot of time on the 3 charts that are attached. I encourage people to look at exhibits 2, 3, and 4 to understand the costs of the unions and their benefit packages. We looked at the healthcare costs, which this upcoming year expected to increase by 6%. Roland and Pete and others on the staff provided a lot of information on that. The risk fund we looked at with the town attorney. At this point, we're planning to keep that flat, though we expect other information may or may not come in by the February meetings. The pension contribution moved around some during our discussions and is overall increasing by 2.44%. We talked in our discussions about subsidies to Nathaniel Witherall and to the school lunch fund. And this also includes funding audited losses for these two organizations with the audited financial statements as of June 30th, 2021. Overall, we looked at capital projects and estimating those to be about $70 million. We expect that the program we started last year, moving a few capital projects to operating, the really operating projects will continue to sort of close out that program. We also expect that it is possible that some of these projects that are currently in the capital plan may be eligible for the ARP funding. And that's certainly something that the committee is looking at. So the total amount overall to be financed in this budget is $463 million. We funded this as we have in the past by use of fund balance, ever so slightly more than we have, but not substantial. Our fund balance has substantially increased. We're very fortunate for that. We increased other revenues by the same inflation rate and also looking at some of the details. So we feel that that's reasonable at an increase of 2.25%. And property taxes, we increased our grand list by 0.74 increase. Overall, over the last 5 years in between the revaluations, that number has been around 1.0. So that's a reasonably conservative estimate. When we put all these numbers together, again, this is, only an estimate and there's lots of work to be done. The mill rate increase was approximately 2.50%. So this is a estimate that doesn't include any impact of the revaluation. So that will be something that, we'll be talking about more, not only in the February meetings, but more importantly, when we come to set the mill rate in May. So
Thank you, Leslie.
any questions? And Pete and Roland may have something to add too. I don't know if they have anything to add.
Thank you, Leslie. I'll open it up to members. Leslie Moriarty, followed by Jeff Raymer.
So I wanted to make a comment a little bit about the process and the end result of the guidelines. There had been increasing concern over the past couple of years that these guidelines have been used more as a cap when we go into the discussions in February about the budget, and not what I think they started out to be, which is just a look at what a level services program might be. I think that the language changes in these guidelines try to enforce or reinforce the comment that these are, it's a level services pro forma based on what we know now, based on the services and the headcount that is delivering these services now, and that changes to this, we expect changes to the individual department plans actually based on the discussions in February. I think that for operating, maybe it serves as a guideline for the departments of where they may need to come in overall or where we're expecting that to be. Capital is a different story. Capital, that number again, the total capital project has been, I think, misused again by different people over the past few years. And even the number of 70 million in here, that's a compromise number. It's not a number that we really have a lot of information about. We know that last year's budget for capital in the fiscal 22 budget, what it shows for fiscal 23 is $94 million of capital projects. Now we know that number includes a rollover of projects that were removed from the fiscal 22 budget without any reallocation of the forecast years for those particular departments. So that's not a known number either. We also know there are changes to other things that had been identified in that fiscal 22 budget. However, the 70 million in my mind, and yes, I did vote in favor of these guidelines, and I think that they do represent a compromised position, but that is one of the key open points as we look into February to really understand what the capital needs are and what that plan looks like. Relatedly, the funding of that capital plan is also an area of concern. The first blush at looking at the Exhibit 1 or our financial chart would show that the capital tax levy, which is what we source out of our tax revenue to support the capital program, looks flat. However, it's really, I believe, the intent is increasing by 5 million, which is a number higher than it's ever been increased before. But the source of the 5 million is coming from fund balance. And there's a risk here. The risk is that in future years, if that level of increasing the capital tax levy is needed to be maintained, that we won't have the capital non-recurring fund to look to, and we will be needing to look to tax revenue to raise it. And it becomes more difficult to have that kind of increase in the tax rate if that's the only thing, if we need to raise all of that in one particular year. So, every year we learn a little bit more. Our fund balance position changes. I think the assumptions in this chart about the use of fund balance sort of got very scientific, more than we typically do at guidelines. We typically wait until February when we really look at the sources and uses of funds. So I just want to, I know that my colleagues understand that guidelines are guidelines, or I hope we understand, agree with me that guidelines are guidelines. And I want to be able to use this as an overarching document to support the discussions that we really want to have in February when the hard work is done. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Jeff, followed by Beth, followed by Andy.
You're on mute, Jeff.
Roland, if you'd be so kind, I'd ask if you could put Exhibit 1 up onto the screen for the public to be able to follow, as well as the members of the committee. I know the members of the committee have it, but the members of the public don't.
Well, it is in the package, so they do have it.
Well, I still want people to be able to access it. There may be people watching who did not access the package beforehand. I'll say before, well, Roland is getting that up, there's more to the guidelines than just Exhibit 1. The textual material, that's as well as the other exhibits, all were important. But people have a tendency to take a look most prominently at Exhibit 1. So I feel like Exhibit 1 requires some attention. It also is important that one understand that this Exhibit 1 was intended to be a projection of what next year's budget could look like if you had level services making adjustments in a practical way to what seemed to be the expense material that you expect to have it be next year. So with that in mind, I was gratified that the salaries, for example, on the town side were expanded to 2.25. If you take a look at the labor contracts that have already been settled, GMEA, the Teamsters, Fire, et cetera, it does suggest that the 2.25, not a smaller number, was the correct number. And so too, the 2.94 for schools matches up with the GEA contract for fiscal year 23. I did have a question at the budget committee. I'm going to repeat the question. No, I'm sorry, I should make one other remark first. So too with the 2.25 inflation factor that's built into the 200s through the 800s, that matches up nicely with the remarks from the Fed by the chairman on the 22nd of September. That's exactly what his projection for 2023 is. Roland, I had a question. I'm going to repeat the question again on utilities, which I noted this had been worked at 2% flat. Would you just reflect back what your basis for that 2% was?
We looked at the actuals going back a number of years, and it never got to that level. And even with a 2% increase, we were below $5 million in the past.
So from that work, you were pretty satisfied that 2% was a realistic figure for projection going forward?
At this point, yes. I mean, depending on how things turn out, certainly with energy, you can see what's happening with fuel.
Okay. I'd like to drop down then to the fixed charges, most particularly the risk fund. In most years in the past, we were adding to the risk fund, typically at a figure of approaching $3 million, sometimes $2.5 million. Our risk fund right now stands just slightly under $4.5 million. And it's a fund that needs to cover us for the next 9 and a fraction months of fiscal year 22 and all 12 months of fiscal year 23. So keep in mind that the slightly less than $4.5 million is not just a risk fund that you're assigning for fiscal year 23. It's almost for 2 years or a year and 3 quarters to be more precise. But keep in mind also that the self-insured retainage under our current policies, which means for new cases being filed for this year, for the past year too, we pay the first $3 million of cost, including the cost of defense on claims made against the town under the insurance policies. And $4.5 million erodes real fast when you're looking at a $3 million SIR. The town attorney has kindly advised us that she's presently showing in her opinion letter to the auditors 42 pending cases that she views as having an exposure of $50,000 or more. Putting aside the or more, just looking at $50,000, 42 cases at $50,000 by itself would be $2.1 million, even if every one of those cases were settled at exactly $50,000. We also, we treat ourselves to a fiction. If we take a risk fund of $4.5 million and we just use it, tapping it down to zero, without replenishing it for a base operating fund going forward, what we're doing is subsidizing our mill rate out of accumulated fund balance in the risk fund, and that's not appropriate budgeting. Given the fact that we have the pending cases that we have and the year and 3 quarters to fund out of it, it leads me back to the opinion from the town attorney that she thought that the $4.5 million would be adequate to handle the cases now pending. It has a suggestion in that, it wasn't her explicit statement, has a suggestion in that funding that fund would more or less reduce that down to zero or near zero at the end of the year and 3 quarters. And that's not how we've operated this fund. We usually have a sum going forward. And with that in mind, I'm going to make the first motion that I would make here, and that is that I would add to that risk fund with $1.5 million. The concept being that I generally expect that we would finish fiscal year 23 having exhausted the $4.5 million, but leaving the $1.5 million as a safety fund and as a kitty with which to start the following year. So if I have a second, that's my first motion to make a contribution to the risk fund, not of zero, but of $1.5 million.
I'll second the motion.
Roland, can you take down the screen? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I would like to go back to the screen when we're done with this motion, if I may.
That's fine. I just wanted to be able to see everybody so that I can, so we have a motion on the floor to increase a risk fund by 1.5 million, seconded by Leslie Moriarty. Discussion.
I'm not going to add any further comment.
Beth, you had your hand up, but do you have your hand up for this or something else?
Actually, this and something else. I was going to address the risk fund as well.
Okay.
I don't think that it should be brought down to zero. I do think we're now at a point where a lot of cases are moving forward in the courts, and this next year, I think we're going to see a whole lot more activity than we did. So it was easy to bring it down in the last term to zero, but I am concerned that the risk fund isn't properly funded under the guide, even as guidelines. I don't think it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Andy?
No comment on the risk fund.
Okay, Leslie?
Yeah, I would like to comment on the risk fund because the town attorney never said that the risk fund would be brought down to zero. She thought it was going to be substantially higher to that in this period of time over the next 18 months or so. point number one. And also, we have to remember that during the COVID, the courts were totally closed. And also, we had very few people working and very few people on the streets. So we also, during that period, really didn't have cases filed against the town. So, we have to take everything into consideration. Thank you.
I would add that, the town attorney did opine on this. She does think that there is sufficient funds in the risk fund. As Leslie Tarkington said, the courts are slowly ramping up. She was looking at the potential for settlement of cases that are out there. And in her opinion, there were sufficient funds in the risk fund. So while I appreciate the pessimism that's been expressed, we do have a recommendation from our town attorney who is close to the cases. And, I am not inclined to support this motion. Okay, further discussion? Bill Drake, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Am I not muted? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Cruiser,
No.
Ms. Hess,
No,
Ms. Kremick,
Yes,
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes,
Ms. Tarkington,
She's muted.
Leslie?
Leslie, I'm going to come back to you.
No.
Mr. Fisher,
No.
I'm a no. Ms. Fastiotis,
No.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce,
No,
Mr. Weisbrod,
No.
Ms. Erickson.
I'm abstaining.
So I read 8 noes, three yeses, 8 noes, and 1 abstention. This item does not pass.
Thank you.
This amendment does not pass.
Okay, Mr. Raymer, you wish to continue?
Please. I'm sorry.
No, I just, you wanted the,
Yes, no, that's, if exhibit 1 could go back up onto the screen for the benefit of the public.
Roland?
I think he's in the process of doing that. Dropping down an item to the subsidy to Nathaniel Witherell, it's in this exhibit 1 at $1,125,000. This was itself a compromise figure that was moved twice. I'm grateful for those gestures of compromise, and I did vote in favor of the guidelines overall, but I feel like that's an incorrect figure. A little history is maybe appropriate here. The actual figures for Nathaniel Witherell for fiscal year 20, to start somewhere, was a loss overall of 5 million, not quite 200,000, 5,185,000 and change. We at that point had a subsidy of 3 million is what we were subsidizing. So it lost all of that 3 million subsidy plus another 2.2 million beside. The following year, in fiscal year 21, fiscal year 21 was a year which was heavily impacted by COVID. I don't know exactly how useful that is, but nevertheless, just to refer to it. And so it was a year in which the census was down because of COVID, but it was also a year in which there was a lot of subsidy that was received from state and federal government as a consequence. So you have to take this with a grain of salt, but nevertheless, the figures were an overall loss of 3,070,000. We at that point were applying a subsidy of 1.5 million, and there was a loss beyond the subsidy of more than another 1.5 million, 1,570,000. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's more or less right. I'm sorry. The subsidy was 1.5 million. The overall loss was 3,050,000. So there was a loss of 1,550,000 over and above the subsidy that we had applied. For the budget year, fiscal year 22, this is budget now, these are not actuals, we're applying a subsidy of 1.5 million. But we're expecting from the projection figures that we were using a loss, an overall loss of 3,382,000, or that's to say a loss of 1,882,000 over and above the subsidy. We seem to be projecting for this facility a loss of $3 million a year. I actually think the facility will do a little better than that. It has a new management. It has some very creative ideas. And I think in fiscal year 23, it'll do a bit better. I just don't think it will do as well as the 1,125,000 subsidy. And if you honestly expect this facility to incur a loss beyond your subsidy, then you're not dealing quite accurately with your taxpayers to reflect in the guidelines of funding with a subsidy at that level. You really ought to be reflecting a subsidy at the level of the way you expect your facility to perform. I'm going to make a motion here that the 1,125,000 be increased to $1.5 million. And that in itself is a compromise figure, because I really, in my heart of hearts, expect that this facility will run overall at a $2 million, maybe a $2.5 million loss, which is to say somewhat more than the $1.5 million that I'm proposing in this motion. But my motion at this point is to amend that figure to $1.5 million, if I have a second.
I'll second.
And once again, Madam Chairman, I've said enough. I'll sit quietly while others comment.
You've said enough, really?
Well, I'm not done, but I'm done with this.
I know you're not done. You're never done.
All right, no, I'm sorry.
Could we just move this off the screen rolling again? I'm sorry. It's just easier for me to see the participants. Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion by Jeff to increase the contribution to Nathaniel Witherell by, well, up to
175,000 to $1.5 million.
To 1.5 million, seconded by Ms. Moriarty. Discussion, Andy?
Thank you. I can add some additional data to what was relayed by Jeff. We just completed September, so I have actual numbers for the first quarter of this fiscal year. And just to put it in perspective, after debt service for fiscal 19, 20, 21, the loss was 6.7 million, 7 million, 4.7 million. But for the first 3 months of this year, after debt service of 1.5 million, there was a gain of $145,000. And that's without any federal funding. You know, last year, the facility received 2.2 million of federal funding, receives none this quarter. Yes, they've gotten a little bit higher Medicaid rates, but if you look closely at the financials, the operating costs are being driven down very, very, very dramatically. And so I think it's premature now to be seeking to increase the allocation for the following fiscal year, given what we were seeing already accomplished by the staff up there for the first quarter of the current fiscal year.
Thank you, Beth.
I would just add that looking in the totality of Nathaniel Witherell, we were giving them 3 million in subsidy several years ago, as Jeff pointed out. We brought it down to 1.5, and to now go down to 1.125 at a time when it's still in need of funding. I don't agree with bringing it down to 1.125, and I think it's unfortunate. I know we've got the evaluation team looking at the RFP. I know there's lots of focus on this facility, but I don't think we should reduce the subsidy coming from the town to ensure that they have the funds they need to operate it properly.
Mr. Weisbrod.
Yeah, I actually think this whole line of discussion is not the right time to have it. These are guidelines, and I may very well view things, and maybe others on the committee may view things quite differently comes February, after we've had the budget committee meetings and full examination of another 3-6 months of data and so on. Also, I would say what we're talking about here is not the notion of supporting Nathaniel Witherell or not. It's purely a budgetary issue. It's a accounting question, which has an impact on the overall budget for the town. So, I'm going to oppose this motion and the other motions. I may have other comments when we raise the guidelines overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weisbrod. Any other comments? Mr. Drake.
In one sentence, I would just say Mr. Weisbrod just said it perfectly. I agree completely with what he said. He's absolutely right.
Thank you. Beth, do you have any further comments on this? Okay, I just see your hand up, that's why. Okay, hearing none. Bill, roll call vote, please.
Yes, we'll start at the other end of the table. Ms. Erickson.
I'm going to abstain again. Thank you.
We're on Mr. Raymer's amendment about the withdrawal. Mr. Weisbrod.
No.
Mr. Deuce.
No.
Mr. Raymer.
Yes.
Ms. Fasciotis.
No.
I'm a no. Mr. Fisher.
No.
Ms. Tarkington.
No.
Mrs. Moriarty.
Yes.
Ms. Crumick.
Yes.
Ms. Hess.
No.
Ms. Cruiser.
No.
That was 3 yeses and 9 nos. The item does not pass.
No, it was 381.
381.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're absolutely right. Thank you.
Mr. Raymer, further comments?
Yes, Roland, can we go back to Exhibit 1 for a moment? I'm going to mention it while he's putting it up. I'll just jump the gun a little bit. On the school lunch figure, had started a much lower figure, but under these guidelines, it's being projected at $225,000. I just wanted to reflect a little history. Our subsidy back in fiscal year 16 was $333,000. In fiscal year 17, it was $246,000. In fiscal year 18, it was $349,000. In fiscal year 19, it was $240,000. In fiscal year 20, it was only $170,000, but it lost it lost actually in total $621,000, which means that net loss after the subsidy was $520,000. For this past year, which of course is very COVID related, so it perhaps doesn't indicate anything, our subsidy was at $250,000, but it incurred a loss beyond that of $834,000. I don't know where we're going to end up on fiscal year 22. I don't have those figures. I'm leaving B without motion, the $225,000. I'll be fascinated to see how this turns out, particularly in some of the things that were discussed under the earlier item with the executive chef. But I'm mentioning just aloud for public consumption that I'm thinking that the $225,000 being proposed may be a little short, but I'm not making any motion as to that item.
Can I just interject for a second? Because you heard from Sean O'Keefe, their goal is to bring down the losses to zero with this new executive chef. So thank you very much.
And I will be as pleased as anybody with that. I just perhaps didn't have his optimism with it. I'm dropping down now to the capital items, if I may, and focusing first upon total capital projects at $70,000. I won't repeat all of the good remarks that were made at the beginning of this process by Mrs. Moriarty. I'll just mention that when we created the model at the budget time this past spring, the capital model that we had set predicted capital projects in fiscal year 23 at $94.5 million, not $70 million. There is an artificial thing that happens with that, and that is to a certain extent that capital projects that weren't approved last year are simply moved by the budget director temporarily anyway into the next following budget year. And that accounts for some of the $94.5 million that's in that figure. Nevertheless, the $70 million feels to be a number which is artificially small. It's, I think, wrong-minded to go into an Exhibit 1 with that as a projection of what we think the capital model is going to look like. And my next motion is that this item should be amended from $70 to $75 million. And that would be my motion if there's a second.
I'll second.
And once again, I think other people should speak now.
Thank you. Can you take the screen down, please, Roland? Sorry. So we have a motion from Jeff Raymer to increase the capital from 70 to 75, seconded by Ms. Moriarty. Discussion, Andy?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for those comments, and Leslie Moriarty too. The 94.5 million is exactly what you said it was. It's just a rollover of projects from last year without any judgment applied to it. A number of those projects will never see the light of day. If you go through it carefully and try to identify projects that are actionable in fiscal 23, you are able to quickly pare the list down to a lower number, approaching $70 million. And also, not unstated here, is the potential impact of the ARP funding, and certainly some portion of those funds will go to offset capital projects that will be funded out of the general budget. And also, finally, make a point on this capital spending. Look, every year we seem to appropriate X, and every year we seem to end up with actual spending that's less than what we appropriate. And every year we seem to have more and more projects, a number of projects increasing from year to year. And I'm very concerned that we appropriate for capital spending, but we don't spend it all. And a lot of things remain unfinished or undocumented. To Leslie Moriarty's point earlier, that she's disappointed that these guidelines appear to give caps. Look, going back the last several years, we may have appropriated X for capital spending, but in some years we spend more than that. That's part of the process. Comes the budget meetings in February. So I'm very happy with the 70 million. I think it's the right number, and I would not make any changes.
Miriam, and then Leslie Tarkington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to support Mr. Raymer's motion, and I actually wish he would have come up with an even larger number, because I think the number that Ms. Moriarty noted, which was the $94 million, which did include a number of projects that we decided to defer, is the definition of kicking cans. If we continuously take projects, move them into the next year, and then say we can't do them, but don't take them off the list, they are just liabilities waiting to happen, and many of them bring upon risk. I do agree with Mr. Deuce that we need to do a good job at following up with departments to ensure that their projects are closed out, but there are also many projects that are multi-year, and there are many projects on that list that actually just started 3 months ago, and they can't really be included as part of what's outstanding. So I think this is an area where the 70 million seems very arbitrary. And again, even the 75 may seem arbitrary, but I think given the level of what it would be, just simply with adding those that we decided to push forward, I don't think 70 million is the right number. So I'm going to agree with Mr. Raymer, because that's the number he put out. Any number above 70 is one worthy of supporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie Tarkington. Leslie, you're muted. Leslie, you're muted.
No, she's off now. No, she isn't now.
So
There
I'm
you go.
sorry. As I said earlier, I think that there will be some projects, hopefully, that we can fund under the ARP plan. I mean, I actually looked at every project, $70 million. There are projects that are both individually on the capital plan, as well as within some of our larger projects. There needs to be some cleaning up. There's duplication, an overwhelming number of certain projects. I'd just like to add some numbers to what Andy said. Currently, there are approximately $142 million of appropriated projects. That's 367 projects at this point in time. The BOE projects are of that number are about 53 million, or a total of 117 projects. And the town projects are minus the BOE, if we want to call it that way, 89 million, 250 projects. So adding these new projects, I think will be, again, I think, more than what can be accomplished. And I think, quite frankly, we need to turn more to our internal staff who are handling these things and ask them what can really be done and how can we work better with you and engineering support to make sure that when we approve and appropriate projects, that they can be completed. So I won't be supporting Mr. Raymer's motion. And again, I do believe that this number was a compromise number, but I also think that it's quite a realistic number in terms of what can be accomplished, and if anything, perhaps aggressive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty.
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of the points that were stated already, but to put them into context. 2 years ago, 36 million of projects were not supported by the BET in the capital budget, but that had been proposed by the budget committee. So those projects rolled over. Then we had a number of projects, and I don't have the number in front of me, that were not supported in last year's budget that were rolled over. So we're talking about a backlog of identified needed work to be done that needs to get addressed. When we talk about the open appropriations, I don't know if that's a staffing issue or how we get more things done, but we do know that many of these projects have moved to be multi-year projects. It takes several years to get done. The Board of Ed has moved from advanced planning into one capital project, so now puts all of their pre-planning, their A&E money, if you will, the design money, into the total budget request. And it takes several years, the first year to spend the design money, the second year maybe to implement. And that's just on average. Some things may take more equipment, have equipment lead times. So what I don't want to do is to stop the funnel now in identifying the projects that we need to do and to take care of to keep the town's infrastructure and other needs moving forward by having an artificially low number here. We're only talking 5 million. I realize that that's not going to change anything, but it's an indication and it sends a signal of what we really need to do to address the town's needs. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm hopeful that the CIP process will be implemented this year so that people can have the opportunity to comment on proposed projects. And certainly, that's an important process that seems to have been missing. So anyway, any further comments? Okay, Mr. Drake, roll call vote, please. And you are muted, so please unmute yourself.
Ms. Cruiser,
Yes.
Ms. Hess,
No.
Ms. Crumick,
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington,
No.
Mr. Fisher.
No.
I'm a no. Ms. Fasciotis,
No.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce,
No.
Mr. Weisbrod,
Yes.
Ms. Erickson.
Abstain.
That item fails 5 yeses, 6 noes, and an abstention. 561.
Okay, Mr. Raymer, any further?
Yes, I'm sorry. Carrying on for the moment. And Roland, once again, if you could put the exhibit 1 up and let me go ahead and start to speak while you're doing that. A little further down on exhibit 1 is the reflection that the cost of the capital projects are reduced by the application of $5 million out of capital non-recurring. Capital non-recurring is at a fairly whopping 11.3, a little higher than $11.3 million. Certainly that's a very high figure, a higher figure than we've normally carried in capital non-recurring, I think. Pete will correct me if I'm incorrect about that. One needs to understand, the public needs to understand that to a certain extent, where I'm using capital non-recurring instead of the item falling to the bottom line where we have the capital tax levy, what's happening there is I'm paying for capital out of reserves that were developed and not taxing the tax-paying public. To a certain extent, when I create a guideline like this that shows the use of that and shows it therefore not in the capital tax levy at the bottom, there's a slight artificiality to the tax-paying public that I've shown them guidelines that that produce a little lower mill rate at the bottom than they would have experienced if I did not do that application of capital non-recurring. Capital non-recurring is, in fact, as they say, unduly large at this point. It is sums which were previously taxed to the public and applied for capital projects, and those are capital projects which have lapsed and those funds haven't been spent, or in some cases I have insurance proceeds and the like. It's not inappropriate for us to apply it. I just want the public to realize that that application of funds is a technique of picking up some of the operating cost and handling it in a way that does not hit the mill rate. My real comment here actually is addressed to the bottom line, the $52 million for the capital tax levy. For years, we had a very right-minded policy of increasing our capital tax levy by $3 million a year. It was to show a responsibility for dealing with the cost of our capital, to keep the amount of capital that we're bonding a little bit under control. It was a financial conservatism. For the last 2 years, we froze that and we ran it at a fairly steady $51 million, $51 million in change. In this case, that got increased slightly to be, instead of 51 and change, it was rounded up to 52 million. But I think it's important that it be understood that you can't dip into capital non-recurring forever. It's a finite fund that isn't going to accumulate at those levels. And this is a sum that won't be available to you in future years. And if you've lost the discipline of increasing the capital tax levy, then what's going to happen to you here is your financial model going forward will no longer work. You're not going to be able to deal with the planning of the execution of capital that you had thoughtfully put together over the prior years. And so I'm critical of the $52 million figure if people are fooling themselves that we're just plain going to keep it there. It is there only because you've had the treat this year of being able to pull $5 million out of capital non-recurring. There's a further latent question I want to focus on, and that is whether or not the capital non-recurring should have been picked up at this place in the budget or dropped down to the bottom line as sources of funding. On the one hand, it really belongs as sources of funding because that's what you're doing. You're reaching into reserves to pay down your mill rate. On the other hand, it belongs up here in capital because by statute, you're not free to use this money for any old thing. Section 7-364 of the Connecticut General Statute says you can only use capital non-recurring to defray the cost of capital projects. And actually, not for now, but for next spring, you have to identify the specific projects that you choose to be funding out of capital non-recurring, because just to apply it generally to the bottom line is to violate that statute. So I'm not making any further motion with regard to those, but I offer those comments. The one last comment I'd make before I now go ahead and be quiet altogether, which I'm sure everybody would welcome, is the use of fund balance in the funding process as well. We also have quite a bit of money in our general fund balance. Our general fund balance is just shy of $68.3 million, well beyond the parameters we set in our policy and well beyond numbers that we've carried before. I support the use of fund balance to buy the mill rate down to a figure, in this case, of a percentage increase of 2.5%, because that's on the basis of mill rate smoothing and predictability for the taxpayers, and returning to the taxpayers something which was effectively a slight overtax in prior years. And if we have an overtax, I can't give it back to the original taxpayers who paid it in years past, but at least I can pay it to the current year's taxpayers. And so I do support the rest of what Mrs. Tarkington had shown in her model. And I have no further remarks on the guidelines.
Can you, Roland, take this down, please, again? Thank you. You know, I appreciate a lot of your comments, but a lot of these comments will be the focus of budget discussions going forward. So
absolutely.
Thank you for those remarks. Andy Dews, followed by Laura Erickson.
Thank you. I think it should be mentioned that the fund balance at this past fiscal year end which Jeff said was 68.3 million, was about $9 million higher than what we had a year previously. And the incremental use of fund balance, including the capital non-recurring monies, is less than the increase in the funds that we had over the past year. So, to Jeff's point, I think it's prudent to return when we have too much, and using this to pay down the mill rate slightly is fine. I think showing the actual distribution from the capital non-recurring should be where it is in the schedule, because as Jeff pointed out, it is restricted to use on capital projects. So I support what we have in the guidelines.
Thank you. Laura? Laura, you're muted. I'm sorry.
I beg your pardon.
That's
Out of
okay.
respect for my colleague, Jeff Raymer, I just wanted to share the reason for my abstention on those three motions. I agree with him that these are all areas, plus the school lunch fund, that will require further review and consideration. I know he shed light on these during the budget committee discussion. I appreciate that he's gotten it out on the record for this regular meeting. I agree with him that these are important issues. I just think in the spirit of moving forward with this document, with the passage of time and more information, I look forward to having these discussions in February and March with additional information. So that is purely the reason for my abstention. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I forgot to ask you why you abstained, so I appreciate the clarification. And again, a lot of what Jeff has brought up will be the subject of conversations during the budget discussions. We will have new members, so a lot of the discussion will be, focused on having fresh eyes, hopefully, and not us old curmudgeons who are on the BET currently. So
I beg your pardon.
I'm looking forward to, well, at least one, me.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to to the next term with anticipation, and obviously we will have some healthy debates. In the meantime, we have the budget guidelines before us, and I guess the question now is: are there any further discussion, or should we take a roll call vote?
I don't think you have a motion yet.
I move that we approve the budget guidelines.
Okay, moved by Leslie, seconded by
I'll
Ann.
second.
Okay, by Leslie Moriarty. Mr. Drake.
Whoa. I have a
I'm
comment.
sorry. Okay,
Sorry.
sorry, David. Sorry, I thought I didn't see any hands, but sorry.
No, I intend to vote against the guidelines, and I wanted to give a very brief rationale, very brief. And I think Mr. Raymer actually touched on many of the points, but the main one is the failure to appropriately put money into the capital tax levy. So it's great, and I support the $5 million that we're putting in from the capital non-recurring funds. That is what I would call a balance sheet item. It's really just a transfer of balance sheet. What's really needed is an income statement item to reflect the long deferred list of projects that we need to start queuing up in a much more thorough way than we have in the past. I realize we can't fund all the projects, but at the beginning, I mean, we need to prioritize and so forth. Most of us on this body, I think, agree that the CIP process needs to be really juiced up to be more effective and to prioritize much more effectively than it has so far. But I do think that if you look back, our capital requests in the budget, in the 15-year plan, have doubled from 600 million roughly to $1.2 billion. All those aren't going to get done immediately. Some of them may not get done, but the general, and most of that is due to the deferred maintenance in the schools. Most of the increase, I mean, is due to the deferred maintenance in the schools. But at the same time, we have not increased our capital tax levy. And so we're about 10 million below, by my calculation, what our pattern had been over many years. So for that reason, I think that we're going to have to start if we want modified pay as you go, we have to do the pay part of it. And it's going to have to be reflected. And I think we can do it without, increasing the mill rate for a whole lot of reasons, which we can get into during the budget discussions in February. So while recognizing the spirit of compromise and applauding that genuinely, I cannot vote for the guidelines until we address the concerns that I've mentioned.
Miriam?
I will, thank you. I will just borrow a comment of Mr. Drake's from earlier, which was I was going to say something, but Mr. Weisbrod said it perfectly. So I will just say that I will also not be approving the guidelines, but for the reasons that Mr. Weisbrod lines out.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dews?
And looking at the recent historical capital tax levy amounts, we need to be mindful of what we did last year, and we'll probably do again this next budget, is to move what had been historically characterized as capital back into the operating budget. So for this fiscal year, we moved $4 million, what was in the prior year in capital, back into operating. That's effectively an increase of $4 million in the capital tax levy. And over 10 years, that's since his annual expense, that's worth $40 million. It's likely that for fiscal 23, we'll do another transfer. Maybe, I haven't seen any numbers yet from Pete, but maybe it'd be 2.5 or 3 million. I don't know. So that has the same effect of increasing the capital tax levy in effect.
Thank you. Ms. Tarkington?
Yeah, I was going to, I second what Andy said, but in addition, we actually did increase the capital tax levy, and I think that should be acknowledged. We increased it by $882,000, so almost $1 million. That was my only comment. It has been increased in this budget guidelines.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, Mr. Dews, roll call vote, please.
Drake?
Drake.
I mean, Mr. Drake, I'm sorry.
Ms. Cruiser.
I'm looking at you and I'm seeing Bill. Go ahead.
No.
Ms. Hess.
Yes.
Ms. Crummey.
No.
Ms. Moriarty.
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington.
Yes.
Mr. Fisher.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Ms. Basiliotis.
Yes.
Mr. Raymer.
Yes.
Mr. Dews.
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod.
No.
Ms. Erickson.
Yes.
That was 9-3. The guidelines pass.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have the minutes.
The minutes, thank you, everyone. Had a couple of last minute changes. They weren't last minute, and I think they're totally appropriate. If I could share screen, we could just scroll through them real fast, and then.
You are a co-host, so you can share the screen.
Okay, here it comes. Does everyone see the minutes?
Yes.
I'm gonna scroll down, and that in blue is a correction which deserves to be made. Nisha Aurora is a BET candidate. I'll keep going. There's some sentences which you see, take a look at them, they make perfect sense. I'll keep going. And let's see here. This is the item of the OCIO for the OPEB. And that's all perfectly clear. Thanks for correction on Robert's rules, and then this date was corrected. Thank you. So those corrections seem in order. I move the minutes including those corrections.
I'll second. Laura Erickson.
Would you like a roll call vote? Is anyone opposed to those minutes as amended?
Could you take down the screen?
Yep, I sure can. Hold on. Bear with me a second. Let's see, stop sharing. Is that better?
Leslie, you have your hand up?
No, it's up from before, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So if there's not any objections, I'll deem those minutes approved as amended. Thank you.
Okay, that's a 12-0 vote.
Thank you.
Okay, Chair's report. There's really little to report this month, other than the fact that we were able to finally pass the guidelines, albeit not by a majority, but by a 9-3 vote. I'm just looking forward to the next 2 months. I'm hoping that next month we can meet in person for the final 2 meetings of the year. COVID seems to be subsiding, so I'm hopeful that the COVID restrictions will be relaxing and we can have our meeting face to face. It's been a long time since we've all been together in one room. Hopefully we can do that as we finish out the terms, and some of us will be leaving. So I wish you all a good month and rest of the month, and we will see you at the next scheduled meetings.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Leslie and seconded by Laura, by Miriam, and it's 8:58 for record purposes. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night.